Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In her first essay, The Objectivist Ethics, in her short work, The Virtue of Selfishness, Ayn Rand will provide an overview of what she calls the virtues. And three of these are what she terms cardinal virtues. We'll come to that in just a moment. And then there's several other virtues that she explores to some degree in sort of overviews and short summaries. Now, why talk in terms of virtues? Traditionally, virtue ethics has looked at certain states of character as being positive. They're good for that person. They lead to happiness, which Rand says is indeed something that we ought to be seeking. And they're also understood as being good per se and being good for the matrix of relationships and society that we live in. And they also represent a full development of what a human being is capable of. So they realize our nature. They also structure our perceptions and our volitions. They are habits that are built over time or dispositions. So this is a robust conception of virtue. And I think that Rand really does have something like that in mind, although she's probably less worried about whether they are good for other people and much more worried about whether they're good for the individual who has them or the people that he or she chooses to view as important in their life, spouses, children, friends, neighbors, etc. So what are virtues doing in her moral theory? She tells us that value is that which one acts to gain and or to keep. So value is something fundamental in her ethics. Virtues, she says, are the act by which one gains and or keeps it. Now, of course, act is a little bit too narrow, so we have to read her a little bit against herself here. These are not simply actions. These are characteristics of people, modes of action, intentionality, all those sorts of things that we would normally think of as involved in virtues. Virtues do culminate in acts, but they're not simply acts. So the virtues are that which allow us to realize our values. And then she says the three cardinal values of the Objectivist Ethics, the three values which together are means to and the realization of one's ultimate value, one's own life, and a little bit later she'll say one's own happiness, are reason, purpose, and self-esteem. Now these sound like, good things, and indeed they generally are. She says that each of these leads us to a particular virtue. So reason as a value is something that we want to have, something we want to keep, something we want to acquire, is embodied in rationality, right? Very similar. Purpose is embodied in productiveness, or as she's going to say a little bit later, productive work. Self-esteem is going to be manifested in the disposition or virtue of pride. So these are the three key virtues. And she says that productive work or productiveness is the central purpose of a rational person's life, the central value that integrates and determines the hierarchy of all their other values. Then she says, reason is the source, the precondition of their productive work, and pride is the result. So we can say that these three virtues and their values are connected together in certain ways. Rationality, she's going to say, is the source of the precondition of productive work. You have to be rational. You have to use your rationality in order to do that. It's also, she's going to say, the source of the other virtues that we're going to discuss, which she places under rationality in her discussion. Self-esteem leads to pride. Pride, as she's going to call it later on, a moral ambitiousness, is the result of these other things. So you could see it as sort of the capstone. And then productiveness is essentially the means by which we realize this, right? It's the central purpose of a rational person's life. It integrates and determines the hierarchy of the other values, as she just said. So it's performing a valuable function. So all three of these are connected together in Rand's view. Let's take a look at what she has to say about each of these. And actually, let's begin with self-esteem. Let's begin at the end, because she's going to say an awful lot about rationality. Rather, self-esteem, which leads to or is embodied in pride. So she says, the virtue of pride is the recognition of the fact that as man must produce the physical values he needs to sustain his life, so must he acquire the values of character that make his life worth sustaining. Now, that's talking about a certain condition for moral existence, right? So what would pride actually be? It would be having, or at least being on the way to, trying to acquire those valuable characteristics, those features of one's character that make a person valuable to themselves, where they can look, proverbially look at themselves in the mirror and like what they see, not because their face is attractive, but because they like the person that they are. So she says that a person is a being of self-made wealth, and they're a being of self-made soul. The virtue of pride can be best described by the term moral ambitiousness. And then she gives you, sort of a rundown of that. It means that one must earn the right to hold oneself as one's highest value by achieving one's own moral perfection. And you do this by never accepting any code of irrational virtues impossible to practice, never failing to practice the virtues you know to be rational, never accepting an unearned guilt and never earning any. So we can go on and on. And so these are, Rand's point of view. It's rooted in objectivist egoism. But the idea here is that self-esteem isn't just something you start out with, it's something that you earn. And so pride would be this ambition of being a better person, being the kind of person who's not, to use one of her favorite words, a moocher, right? Somebody who sponges off of others. So that could be furthered in a lot of ways. I remember when I was a kid and I would go over to my friend's house for the weekend. We engaged in a lot of fantasy wargaming using miniature figures, and his parents were much, much, better off than my mother was. And my mom would send me over with a casserole or with some sort of dessert, and I would give it to my friend George's mom. And she would look at it and she'd be like, you don't have to bring all this stuff. And I would say, well, my mom wanted, me to give this to you so that we wouldn't just be, and I forget exactly what the term was, but it was something like a moocher, somebody who is a parasite, who lives off the largesse of others. And it was kind of a running joke at the time. But that embodies something that Rand is actually talking about here with pride. Not only is it about having wealth that you've developed yourself, it's about having wealth of character that you've developed yourself. And there's many people who have wealth. They've got a lot of zeros behind the numbers in their bank account, but they're complete pieces of garbage as human beings. That would not be pride. Let's talk about purpose now. So she talks about productive work. She says the virtue of productiveness is the recognition of the fact that productive work is the process by which our mind sustains our life. The process that sets us free of the necessity to adjust ourselves to our background, as all animals do, and gives us the power to adjust the background to ourselves. It is the way in which we transform our environment. And we can think about this in terms of, the physical environment. We could think about it in terms of the workplace or the economy. We could think of it in terms of the online environment. It's all ways in which we change things to no longer merely adapt ourselves, but to change things around us. So she also says something else that's really important here. It does not mean unfocused performance of the motions of some job. So it's not just going through the motions. It's not just doing what you're told to do or following some, script. She says it means the consciously chosen pursuit of a productive career in any line of rational endeavor, great or modest on any level of ability. It's not the degree of a person's ability nor the scale of their work that's ethically relevant here, but the fullest and most purposeful use of their mind. So, for example, being a customer service worker at a fast food restaurant can be done in a productive way. Of course, you're doing so for a big corporation that's making a lot of money on what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't have to preoccupy you. You can focus on the fact that you're doing your job well for you. So, for Rand, any sort of productive work can fit into this virtue of productivity. It's the means or the manner in which it's done. Let's talk about rationality now. So she actually says quite a lot about this, some of which is encompassed under the other virtues. So she says that the virtue of rationality means recognition and acceptance of reason as one's only source of knowledge, one's only judge of values, and one's only guide of action, a total commitment to a state of full conscious awareness, the maintenance of a full mental focus on all issues, all choices in all of one's waking hour. So that's really kind of hard to pull off. That's a lofty status. No automatic thinking, no just responding to things on the basis of instinct or emotion. You should be using rationality all the time. So there's a certain reflexivity to this. Being rational in this respect of having the virtue of rationality means exercising that very virtue all of the time. So we probably don't measure up to that all of the time. But this idea that reason becomes the sole guide is really central there. She goes on and she says, it means a commitment to the reality of one's own existence, to the principle that all of your goals, values, actions take place in reality, so you should never place any value or consideration above one's perception of reality. It also means that all of your convictions, values, goals, thoughts, desires, and actions must be based on, derived from, chosen, and validated by a process of thought. So that means that you couldn't just accept Rand at her word either if you were following this out. It's rather Cartesian in many respects. You have to think things through before you accept anything. That would be rationality. Now, she thinks that other virtues fit into this as well. So, independence means acceptance of the responsibility of forming your own judgments and living by the work of your own mind. So, for example, plagiarism would be obviously a violation of the virtue of independence, living off of the fruits of somebody else's mind. Doesn't mean, of course, that you have to invent the entire world of knowledge all by yourself. You could never look at Wikipedia. But you should be engaging in some sort of productive work using the things that you have, and that contributes to independence. Let's say you're, in an office writing reports. Obviously, you're not generating all the data yourself, but the report is your own product, right? Integrity. You should never sacrifice your convictions to the opinions or wishes of others. You should, by contrast, maintain your own views despite the fact that other people don't agree with you. That would be the virtue of integrity. Then honesty. This is an interesting one. Here we go. never attempt to fake reality in any manner. What does it mean to fake reality? It means to conceal from yourself the fact that things are not as you would like them to be. So, if you have cancer, you need to face up to the fact that you have cancer. And then the question is, well, what stage is it and what can be done about it? Not, pretend that you don't have it or that it's less serious than it is. If you have a bad temper and blow up at people for stupid things, well, then honesty would demand that you actually acknowledge that. And if you are in a relationship and, somebody is good for you, but you aren't really that attracted to them, you don't have to pretend that you're, disgusted by them or something to be free of them. You could just say, well, there's a disjunction here. I know that you'd be a great spouse, but I'm not attracted to you. Just be honest about it, right? So there's all sorts of ways in which one could do that. Honesty about one's own motives would be really central, one would assume. And then finally, one should never seek nor grant the unearned and undeserved, neither in matter nor spirit. That is what she says is the virtue of justice. Never desire, never seek, never grant the unearned and undeserved. So what you don't actually deserve, don't expect people to give it to you. If you're producing videos on YouTube and you're not a dynamic speaker, then don't become envious of those who are and get more likes. Again, we could also apply this to other things. If you're producing very in-depth videos and, going deep into texts, don't expect that that's going to get all sorts of views like much more superficial, glitzy stuff is going to either, according to, Rand, would be an instance of justice. Things that are unearned, don't give them to others as well. Don't give people handouts. Don't make things easier for people that they don't deserve to have made easy for them. That strikes a lot of people as quite selfish and cruel. Rand thinks that that's actually part of justice. So all of these virtues really, according to Rand, stem from the virtue of rationality, but each one of them is important in its own right. So we have the three cardinal virtues here of rationality, productiveness, and pride, and then we have these other four virtues that each fit under somehow the rubric of rationality. And these are the ideal character traits of the good person in Randian, egoist ethics.